Well, folks, as you know, I love one show on TV more than any show on TV. The View.
Gary!
I've had a lifelong ambition to actually be a guest on The View. They'll never have me on, of course, because it would go horribly for them. But today, we're going to go through some of the cringiest moments from The View, a repository of nearly all human stupidity, total IQ 7. Every single day on The View is a contest in stupidity. Truly, it's an amazingly competitive match between some of the dumbest people on Earth. No one really notices on a given day that Whoopi Goldberg is a very dumb person who says very dumb things because everybody else is so dumb on The View that she's constantly outshone. She seems like the most sane person on The View, which is kind of an amazing statement. Trying to suss out which person on The View is least intelligent is an exercise in quantum mechanics.
What do you get when a fast-talking fact machine, disguised as Ben Shapiro, crashes headfirst into a human eye roll factory, otherwise known as Whoopi Goldberg on The View? You get a lukewarm disaster of a hot take, an internet meltdown of epic proportions, and a philosophical mugging so brutal, Whoopi might need to file an emotional restraining order. Buckle up because this showdown was like watching a TED Talk collide with a daytime soap opera, and the fallout is absolutely glorious.
Whoopi Goldberg, she of the genius sort of sage presence on The View.
Thanks.
She's like, I'm not saying that maybe white people need to get beaten up for police reform to happen, but maybe white people need to get beaten up for police reform to happen.
But how many times do we need to see white people also get beaten before anybody will do anything?
Okay, so first of all, this is unbelievably stupid.
Yep.
We've seen many, many cases of police brutality against white people.
Picture the scene, The View's cozy, pastel-set bubble, where over-caffeinated hosts serve up half-baked opinions, and the audience claps like trained seals at every progressive platitude. In the middle sits Whoopi Goldberg, the reigning queen of circular logic, armed with the sacred shield of her truth. All is well in this land of televised feel-goodery. But somewhere in the distance, lurking in the shadows of unfiltered podcasts and relentless logic, is Ben Shapiro, a man who treats facts like an Olympic sport and possesses the vocal cadence of a caffeinated chipmunk on a caffeine IV. He's not actually on the set of The View, of course. That would be like tossing a Rubik's Cube into a kindergarten art class. No, he's too busy mocking them from afar, with the clinical precision of someone who's never met an argument he can't turn into Swiss cheese. According to some commentators, The View itself is a repository of nearly all human stupidity, with a collective total IQ of 7, making it ripe for this kind of intellectual dismantling.
She's trying to make an anti-Trump argument. She's like, I can say anything I want. And she's like, I'm going to say something super racist. They're all like, oh, man. Yeah. Well, apparently her hair was not her only bad decision that day.
The Holocaust isn't about race. No. It's not about race.
No,
it's about
a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man.
No!
That's what it's about.
The catalyst for this particular implosion? Whoopi Goldberg, in her genius sort of sage presence, decided to wade into the complex issue of police reform. With a take so unbelievably stupid, it practically begged for Shapiro's brand of deconstruction. She mused, how many times do we need to see white people also get beaten before anybody will do anything? This comment, attempting to make a point about racial disparities in police brutality, was immediately seized upon by critics as well, heroically out of touch, given the many documented cases of police brutality against white individuals. It was the kind of statement that makes you wonder if the blue cards the hosts allegedly read from are occasionally just filled with random inflammatory Mad Libs.
On who you talk to. Whoopi, always available to sign in.
Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
To both compare Israel and the United States to terrorist organizations and also compare terrorist organizations to apparently not terrorist organizations. Like, Hamas is not a terrorist organization? Oh, man. It is amazing because Whoopi is sort of seen on this show as sort of the wise old sage. And I have to say, you need better sages.
Now, Ben Shapiro didn't just disagree with Whoopi. That would be far too simple, too boring. Instead, he metaphorically rolled up his sleeves, cracked his knuckles, and proceeded to dismantle her argument in real time. Like a surgeon performing emergency brain surgery with the lights off, using only a pocket knife and sheer willpower. You could almost hear the gears in Whoopi's head grinding to a halt as Ben uploaded a torrent of receipts, statistics, historical context, logical counterpoints, faster than a caffeinated librarian on a tight deadline. She was left scrambling for an escape hatch, like a hamster trying to avoid a sneeze in a wind tunnel. While Whoopi kicked things off with a rant that felt like a cross between a perplexing monologue and an episode of The Twilight Zone, Ben calmly waited, then blinked twice, looked into the abyss of her argument, and simply said, "Actually." And that's when the carnage began.
So Whoopi Goldberg was on that great repository of all human intelligence, The View, and she was explaining that people who are not using masks are going to make things more dangerous for themselves. She's talking about how the mask will protect you from the flu. Oh, Lord. Here we go.
Well, no, you know.
Well, you did have that.
I did have a cough, and when you
Had a
did
little
not show
cold.
up, Brian goes, "Thanks, Whoopi's out."
Well, I assume that is because when you have little ones, you will always have things that you travel with. So as people will tell you, yeah, take off your mask, don't worry about it, we're not going to check it anymore. Just know the flu
It's still
will fly in. Okay, because the flu flew in and got me.
Okay, so I'm just going to point out here that the entire narrative on the mask was about COVID. And now they're you should probably wear a mask because if you take off the mask, the flu will fly in.
Whoopi tried to fight back, of course. She leaned into her trusty tactic. If she spoke louder, perhaps with more dramatic hand gestures, maybe her argument would magically acquire more weight. When that classic View strategy failed, she pulled out her secret weapon, the phrase that in Whoopi's world is the intellectual equivalent of a mic drop. Well, I just think, surely, if you preface your statement with your personal feelings, it becomes irrefutable, right? Wrong. Ben, unfazed, responded with his usual toolkit, footnotes, probably mental ones, a healthy dose of smugness, it's part of the brand, and a flurry of economic or social principles you've likely never encountered outside a graduate-level seminar. By the time he was done, you could almost see the spirit of Whoopi's argument pack its bags and leave the room in defeat. Somewhere in the background, Joy Behar was likely squinting, as if trying to solve a complex math problem without any of the numbers.
We saw Whoopi Goldberg over the weekend suggest that Nikki Haley is not a new generation. How can you say she's a new generation? Whoopi Goldberg is 67 years old. Nikki Haley is 51 years old. Donald Trump is nearing 80. Joe Biden is 80. So yeah, technically speaking, she is in fact a new generation, but here is Whoopi Goldberg speaking for the youth of America.
Now that's what they're saying, suddenly. Everybody said, oh yeah, we should reflect all of us. Okay.
This takedown hit so hard, not just because Ben was right in the factual sense, but because he was prepared. This wasn't his first rodeo dissecting what he perceives as flawed liberal arguments. This ties into another infamous Whoopi moment, her historically bizarre claim that the Holocaust isn't about race. That comment, which led to a suspension and multiple apologies, became a glaring example for critics of The View's tendency towards what they see as ill-informed pronouncements. Shapiro and others delight in pointing out these instances, contrasting Whoopi's wise old sage persona with statements that appear profoundly ignorant. The argument from critics like Shapiro is often, if you're going to position yourself as a moral and intellectual authority, you should probably have a basic grasp of history and logic.
This was taken as anti-Semitism. She didn't say that Jews weren't specifically targeted, by the way. She didn't actually say an anti-Semitic thing the way that Whoopi Goldberg did. She just said that when people are inhumane to each other, bad things happen. For this great crime, she was not suspended. She was fired outright from The Mandalorian, losing presumably hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary because she was one of the main characters and they were considering a spinoff of The Mandalorian with Gina. They fired Gina, so we hired her, right? We have a new movie that's coming out with Gina Carano in the next couple of months, which I'm excited to tell you about. Okay, but they fired her outright, did Disney. Whoopi Goldberg says something far worse in every respect than Gina Carano ever said about the Holocaust. And she's going to get a 2-week suspension.
The most brutal moment, the one that sent Twitter into an absolute frenzy, was the breathtaking second when Whoopi simply paused. She had nowhere to go, nothing left to say. The gears in her brain were visibly grinding as she desperately searched for a retort, an escape, anything. It was like watching a dial-up modem try to download a feature film. Ben just sat there, metaphorically speaking, smug as a cat who knows exactly where the treats are hidden, allowing the silence to consume the room. And when that silence hit, it was beautiful. A rare moment of unscripted intellectual surrender on a show known for its relentless noise. The internet, of course, crowned him the winner, not because he's universally beloved, but because Whoopi had walked into an intellectual gunfight armed with glitter and feelings, and left with a throbbing headache and some very questionable logic.
Never look for consistency with the left. It is all just a game of power. In any case, Goldberg apparently is livid and feels humiliated over the suspension. She feels ABC executives mishandled this. She followed their playbook. She went on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and then apologized again on The View the next day, the source told the Post. Her ego has been hurt. She's telling people she's going to quit. Suspension from The View is like getting suspended from Bravo. The bar is very low. Prior to her suspension, sources that spoke with Page Six said that employees and executives, including insiders at Disney, were furious over her remarks and the fact she had not been disciplined yet.
Naturally, the mainstream media, often seen as a protective shield for The View, reportedly scrambled to defend Whoopi. Think pieces probably flooded the internet overnight with headlines like, "Why Whoopi's emotional intelligence is more valuable than Shapiro's cold data," or "The importance of lived experience in political discourse." But it was too late. The damage was done. Ben, fresh off his logical trouncing, likely continued to sip his cold brew, nodding solemnly as though he'd just won a national spelling bee, while everyone else was still doodling hearts on their scantrons.
Whoopi Goldberg, yesterday, she did her full apologies. You'll remember that 2 days ago, Whoopi Goldberg went on The View and she suggested that the Holocaust was not about race. And this tied into a broader ideology of the left, which suggests that Jews are white people, and therefore, the Holocaust was actually white people attacking white people, which is a thing she actually said on air. Then she went on Stephen Colbert, where she quasi-apologized and then doubled down and suggested once again that the Holocaust was not about racism because it was white people attacking other white people. She issued a written statement. The written statement came out before the Colbert appearance, but probably was written after she had taped for Colbert already. In any case, she came out on the air yesterday, and then she did her fulsome apology.
The real takeaway here wasn't just the savage burn, it was the silence. That pregnant, awkward, soul-crushing silence from Whoopi when the audience, and perhaps even her co-hosts, didn't know whether to clap, cry, or start a GoFundMe for her dignity. This was the kind of silence that separates genuine thinkers from televised talkers. While one side was fumbling through emotional ramblings and recycled talking points, Ben Shapiro was laying down cold, hard facts like a champion. Of course, Whoopi, still licking her wounds, probably tried to clarify her position in a follow-up segment that was even more baffling than the original rant. Her big defense likely boiled down to, "Well, I felt like what I said was valid because it felt valid when I said it." This, ladies and gentlemen, is the verbal equivalent of trying to return a used toaster with no receipt because it didn't toast your bagel to the precise shade of existential angst you were feeling that morning. Ben, of course, remained unbothered. His version of gloating is probably just referencing Aristotle in a monotone voice and sending you an unsolicited article link. He's like Wikipedia if it had Wi-Fi and a superiority complex. In the end, this wasn't just a debate, it was a masterclass in what happens when you mistake applause for accuracy. When your entire worldview is based on how something feels, it's going to crash spectacularly when someone shows up armed with how things are. And that's why this moment will live on in meme infamy. Not because Ben Shapiro is always right, but because it's the intellectual equivalent of challenging a chess master with a handful of finger puppets. So, to all the truth enthusiasts out there, if your entire argument starts with, "I feel like," swing, just know that somewhere, Ben Shapiro is cracking his knuckles, preparing to turn your emotional TED Talk into a logical demolition derby. The View will undoubtedly continue its daily broadcast, but the echo of that silence, the ghost of that takedown, will linger in the studio for a long, long time.